And if we hear it a little louder, maybe it'll be even better. So what I wanted to talk about was something very exciting. Faith comes from hearing the Word of God. How many of you here would want to have faith that could move a mountain? I would. I want that kind of faith. So we're going to look at 3 short examples in the Bible. And we're going to see what we can glean from healing, 3 different situations of healings that happened. Okay, and we're going to see what we can learn from it. Anyways, I was very excited reading about these things. So first of all, let's start off with the story of Bartimaeus. Mark chapter 10. If you can go to Mark chapter 10. We're going to look at blind Bartimaeus and see what we can learn from him, from his story. All right, so Mark chapter 10. And if we start in verse 46, it says, they came to Jericho. As he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road. So let's just set the stage here. So who's Bartimaeus? What do we know about him? Well, we know he's a beggar, right? We know he's blind. He can't see. We don't know how long he's been blind. Like, it may have been, his whole life. May have been just several years. It doesn't seem like we know that detail, but he's been blind for a while. And most blind people would go to this, the city gate, because lots of people pass through there. And then what they do is they wait and they beg and hope to get enough money to to get food for the day. So when he woke up in the morning, he's like, some of you might wake up in the morning and you might think, what would make it a good day for myself? If you're, maybe you have a project you're working on, you think, man, if I could get this project done, that would be a good day. Bartimaeus, when he woke up that morning, he probably thought to himself, what's a good day for me? If I get 2 coins, and that'll be just enough to feed my belly for the day. Like, maybe that's what he woke up and he says, okay, I'm going to go to the gate now, and if I can get my 2 coins, that'll be an awesome day. He probably had hopes that maybe that could happen, because there's probably been many days where he went to beg and he didn't get much and he didn't have enough to eat for the whole day and he was hungry. So anyways, let's see what happens. So he's at the gate. And then it says he hears that it was Jesus the Nazarene coming, because there's a large crowd there. So he's sitting there blind. He probably hears this huge commotion. He hears a group of people coming and he doesn't know what's going on. So he's like, what's happening? And then the people there who are near there say, well, it's Jesus coming this way. So he knows something about Jesus. When he heard it was Jesus, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And, when he says son of David, I think that refers to the fact that he believed Jesus was the Messiah. Many were sternly telling him to be quiet, but he kept crying out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And I also thought about this, and I thought it was possible that as Jesus and the crowd were coming from far away, he hears this commotion, and he can't see how far away they are, so he just starts shouting, help me, help me. And it's possible that the group was too far away to, out of earshot, and then the people around him are all getting annoyed by him because he's like, they're coming, they're far away, and he's just shouting and annoying them. And I was thinking, sometimes, people in the world can even discourage us sometimes from wanting to go to Jesus. They might say to you, well, your problems are too big. You got into that problem yourself, you got to figure it out. Oftentimes there can be lots of worldly advice that can prevent us from going to Jesus. And that's what we see here. The people here were telling him, not to bother Jesus. Just, hey, don't bother him. You're annoying us. Stop it. So, but look at verse 49. I love this verse. Jesus stops and says, call him here. And I think it said when you read the same account in Matthew, I think it's Matthew 20, it says he felt compassion for him. So if we're coming to Jesus with whatever our problem is, imagine that the God of heaven, in the universe, he feels compassion for us. Like, he cares about our own problems in life. Like that's really something. So Jesus stopped and said, call him here. So they called the blind man and said, take courage, stand up, he's calling for you. In verse 50, throwing aside his cloak, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And I read that oftentimes for blind people, all their worldly possessions that they had, it wasn't a lot, but usually they kept them all in their cloak. So you imagine this, commotions all around, all these people. He's got, whatever his few possessions are in his cloak, and he just leaves it all behind. Like anyone could take it, and he runs off. He needs to get to Jesus right away. Like that. Imagine that. So answering him, Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? And if you think, pause that for a sec. What do you want me to do for you? Imagine if the Lord asked you that question. You know, Bartimaeus woke up, he might have thought, hey, a great day is if I get my 2 coins, enough to eat for today. Maybe he would have thought a little bigger and thought, wow, if I could get 10 coins, I'd have enough for the whole week. That would be amazing. Like maybe he'd, you know, not go to a huge problem, but he'd think, oh, maybe I could get this. And if the Lord asks us that question, what do you want me to do for you today? You know, look what he says. He says, Rabbi, I want to receive my sight. And the Lord said to him, go, your faith has made you well. So when I read that, you know, the first question we see here is Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do for you? You know, if the Lord asks us that, we shouldn't think that our problems are too big for the Lord. Right? We could have really big problems in our, you know, how our mind works maybe, or with health, or we could have problems with people or whatever, and we should never think, wow, this is too big. I shouldn't go to the Lord about this. Other people might even try to discourage us like we see here in this story, but we should go to the Lord and we should think big. What is our problem the Lord wants to help us with? And he is able. He says, go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and he began following him on the road. So I love that. The first example here, Bartimaeus. What do you want me to do for you? You know, go to the Lord, and tell him all your problems. Don't hold anything back, and, you know, have faith that the Lord can help you. So let's look at the second example. Go to Matthew chapter 10, I think. Let's see. Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. So this is going to be starting in verse 27 about the 2 blind men who come to Jesus. But just before that, setting the stage, you know, what had happened before that was, you know, a synagogue officer came to Jesus and said, hey, my daughter's dead. Can you come and put your hand on her and heal? So Jesus, as he's on his way there, a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years touches him. She's healed. And then after that, the Lord goes to the synagogue official and heals the daughter as well. So this is all kind of what's just happened. So then if we look into verse 26, it says, this news spread through all the land. So everyone has been hearing about these miracles Jesus has done. And then in verse 27, as Jesus went from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying out, have mercy on us, son of David. So we see again, you know, they call him son of David, which I think meant they knew he was the Messiah. And when he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus asked them, he said to them, do you believe I am able to do this? So we see in the other example, Jesus asked him a question, what do you want me to do for you? And, you know, Bartimaeus wanted a big answer, and he got it. In this example, we see a different question. Do you believe I am able to do this? They said, yes, Lord. He touched their eyes and said, it shall be done to you according to your faith. So I thought about that, and I was thinking to myself, if you think in your own mind, you know, big problems you're facing in your life or, you know, with others, just complications that are too complex to solve, do we ever doubt? We don't come to the Lord because we just doubt He is able to help us. And I was thinking about that for myself this morning, and I went on a little walk, and I was telling the Lord all these things, different things I've been praying for, and I said, Lord, you are able. The Lord wants us to come to Him 100% knowing He is able to help us. Right? He wants, number one, bring us the concerns we have, like we saw in the first question, what do you want me to do for you? Secondly, we see here, he wants us to believe He is able to help us no matter how complicated the situation. Now, if you think about your own life, you know, maybe problems you're facing or things like that, you know, you might think, well, you know, this thing is just too big a deal. You know, it's been like this my whole life. You know, I don't think I'll ever be able to solve it because it's, you know, experience has told me it can't be done. If we think about that, I have one last example to share, which is kind of, you could say, the impossible situation. And the Lord wants to use this to build our faith, to know even mountains can be moved if we believe. So let's go to the last example in Matthew. See in Matthew, go to chapter 17. Matthew 17. And I think this example would be, if you ask yourself, what if my case is impossible? It's just too complicated. I can't think of any solution. It's just too big. And then we don't even bring it to the Lord. If that's us, let's see what we see here in Matthew 17. So it's starting in verse 14. It says, when they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees, and said, Lord, have mercy on my son. For he's a lunatic and very ill. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him." And, when I read this example in Luke, it said that this son had been in this condition since childhood. So here's a condition that had existed for many, many years. The man had probably gone to many doctors and, other people who, maybe he paid lots of money and they promised, "Oh, we can heal him." And, time and time again, it didn't work. He even goes to the disciples of Jesus and it doesn't work. So I'd almost say this is like an impossible situation. And let's see. And then the father says, we see in the other example, the father said, "Lord, if you were able." So even the father had some doubt. And then the Lord had said, "All things are possible to him who believes." The Lord rebuked the evil spirit. The demon came out and the boy was cured at once. And then the disciples said, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he said, "Because of the littleness of your faith. For I truly say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." So just to close off the thoughts here, what is your impossible case? Is it, temptations for certain sins? Is it just, how we think in our mind? Is it health problems, financial problems? What is our impossible case? I'm encouraged, and I want to encourage you guys to bring it to the Lord. The Lord will ask you, what do you want me to do for you? You tell him, and he'll say, "Do you believe I am able to do this?" "Yes, Lord." I think these examples are here for us. Don't stay. Sometimes we can get discouraged, by thinking about our problems. Things aren't working out, and discouragement leads to sin. We can't stay there. If we're discouraged, go to the Lord. What do you want me to do for you? "Lord, I believe you're able to do this." And like it says in this, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, "Move from here to there." It will move, and nothing will be impossible. So let's remember that this week.